In all my cycles as a Galactic Council observer, and trust me, that's more years than most species have had written language, I've never seen anything quite like what happened in Courtroom Theta 9 on the day everything changed. And I mean everything. Let me set the scene for you. Because context matters here. Context matters a lot. The trial had been going on for 17 standard months. 17 months. Do you have any idea how long that is when you're watching 7 different species argue about jurisdiction, legal precedent, and whether the concept of intent even translates across biological imperatives? The Vrax delegation alone had filed 412 motions to dismiss based on their species' unique perception of time, making the entire concept of a trial fundamentally incompatible with their existence. The judge, a floating luminoth named Radiance Through Suffering, which should tell you everything you need to know about their personality, had actually started glowing dimmer from pure exhaustion. The defendant was a Krell mining executive named Thorvax Kanash, accused of authorizing waste dissuades methods that poisoned 3 colony worlds and killed approximately 4.2 billion sentients across multiple species. Not suspected. Accused with evidence so overwhelming that the data crystals containing it literally had to be stored in a specialized vault because their combined mass was creating a minor gravitational field. But here's the thing about galactic law. And oh, this is where it gets fun. Every single species had to agree on the legal framework before prosecution could proceed. Every single one. The Krell insisted on biological determinism defenses. The Yuthran wanted collective responsibility trials involving Thorvax's entire genetic line. The Peluvians, bless their 3 hearts, kept arguing that since time was relative, the crime hadn't actually happened yet from certain reference frames. And the humans had been sitting quietly in the observer section for months, just watching. We'd honestly forgotten they were there. See, humanity was new to the council. Barely 60 standard years since first contact. Most species treated them like the galactic equivalent of that neighbor who just moved in and hasn't learned where the recycling bins go yet. Polite nods, vague acknowledgements. But nobody really expected them to contribute anything meaningful to serious discussions. They were loud, sure, emotional, definitely prone to bizarre chemical reactions they called crying or laughing at inappropriate moments. But dangerous? Revolutionary. Please. I remember looking over at the human delegation that morning, day 497 of trial proceedings. If you're keeping track, and yes, it felt exactly as soul-crushing as that sounds, and thinking they looked particularly unremarkable. There were maybe a dozen of them, dressed in their standard formal attire, those strange cloth wrappings they called suits, various shades of dark colors, faces displaying that peculiar range of pigmentation their species found so important to categorize. The lead human delegate was Ambassador Kwame Okonkwo, a male with rich dark skin and eyes that seemed perpetually tired. Next to him sat Dr. Yuki Tanaka, their xenobiology expert, who spent most sessions taking notes on a primitive electronic device, fingers moving in a blur. Security Chief Rajesh Kapoor stood by the entrance, scanning the room with the kind of vigilance that seemed excessive until you remembered humans evolved as both predator and prey, and scattered among them were their advisors, Fatima El-Rashid, Diego Vasquez, Keiko Yamamoto, and others whose names I'd noted but never bothered to memorize books. Again, nobody expected them to matter. Oh, how wrong we were. On day 497, Radiance Through Suffering was attempting to mediate between the Vrax and the Yuthran delegations over whether temporal causality could be established when I'm not making this up. A mathematical proof depended on accepting that the observer's biochemical makeup influenced quantum state collapse in ways that made species-neutral evidence theoretically impossible. The Vrax were arguing this meant no crime could be proven. The Yuthran were arguing this meant all crimes were simultaneously guilty and innocent, and the rest of us wanted to throw ourselves into the nearest star. Thorvax Kanash sat in his containment field, looking smug. You could tell he knew exactly what was happening. See, Krell law had a statute of limitations based on deliberation time. If a trial exceeded 18 months without reaching procedural consensus, The accused walked free. He was watching the countdown, those 6 eyes of his gleaming with satisfaction, mandibles clicking in what I'd learned was Krell laughter. 17 days. That's all he needed. 17 more days of this circular nonsense and 4.2 billion murders would be legally erased. That's when she stood up. A human girl, not even one of the official delegates. She'd been sitting in the 3rd row of the human section, so unremarkable, I'd literally never noticed her before. Young by human standards, maybe 20 of their years, which I think is barely adult for them. Small frame, maybe 1.6 meters tall, with that brown skin tone humans called tan and dark hair pulled back in a simple configuration. She wore a plain gray suit that looked cheap even by human standards, and she carried nothing but a small bag slung over one shoulder. She just stood up. Didn't ask permission. Didn't signal the ambassador. She stood, stepped into the aisle, and started walking toward the central platform. Security moved immediately, of course. Rajesh Kapoor, to his credit, moved to intercept, reaching for her arm. But she said something to him too quiet for the audio pickups to catch, and I saw his face change. Whatever she said, he stepped back and let her pass, though he looked like he'd just swallowed something unpleasant. The entire courtroom went silent, and I mean silent. 700 beings representing 43 species, all of them stopping mid-argument to stare at this tiny human walking down the center aisle like she owned the place. Radiance through suffering brightened slightly, probably in confusion, and their voice boomed across the chamber. The court recognizes an unscheduled presence. Human delegate, your observer privileges do not include direct participation. My name is Zainab Okafor, the girl said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the Luminoth's speech like it was nothing. I'm not here as part of the delegation. I'm here to invoke Section 47 of the Galactic Legal Compact, subsection C, paragraph 9, the right of personal testimony in cases of species-wide catastrophic harm. The silence got louder, if that makes sense. Because Section 47, oh boy, Section 47, that was the nuclear option. A legal provision so old and so rarely used that most modern law schools didn't even teach it anymore. It was from the ancient days of the Council, when space travel was new and most species genuinely didn't know if they'd accidentally committed genocide when they colonized a new world. It allowed any sentient directly affected by the alleged crime to bypass all procedural frameworks and present evidence directly to the accused. The catch? The testimony had to be delivered in person, face to face. No recordings, no remote transmission. And it had to be completed in a single session. No breaks, no adjournments. And most importantly, if the council accepted the testimony as valid evidence, all procedural projections were permanently waived. Thorvax's mandibles stopped clicking. His smugness evaporated like morning mist on a hot day. And let me tell you, watching a Krell look worried is something special, because their entire evolutionary history is built around being the scariest thing in any room. This is highly irregular, one of the Vrax delegates hissed, their temporal tentacles writhing in agitation. Section 47 has not been successfully invoked in over 3,000 cycles. The procedural requirements are clearly stated and I meet them, Zainab said, still walking, still calm. She'd reached the central platform now, standing in the open space between the judge's floating podium and Thorvax's containment field. I am a direct survivor of the Kepler 442 colony poisoning. I was there when the waste disposal from Thorvax's mining operations contaminated our water supply. I watched it happen. I can testify to the intent, the execution, and the consequences across species lines because she paused, and for the first time I heard emotion creep into her voice. Because it didn't just kill humans, it killed everyone. Ambassador Okonkwo had his hand over his face. Dr. Tanaka had gone pale. The other human delegates looked like they were witnessing something between a miracle and a disaster, and I couldn't tell which they thought it was. Radiance through suffering dimmed and brightened rapidly, the Luminoth equivalent of heavy thinking. Your claim must be verified. You state you are a survivor of Kepler. I am. Kepler 44-2 was one of the affected colony worlds in this case. Primary population, human. Secondary populations, Vrax colonists, Peluvian Research Station, small Yithran observer outpost, and, the judge paused, their light flickering with what might have been surprise, 3 Krell mining supervisors, who died in the initial contamination event. Oh, that was clever. See, the whole reason this trial had become such a nightmare was that the affected worlds had such mixed populations that no single species' legal framework could cover everyone. But Section 47 didn't care about that. It was predicated on personal testimony, individual truth, something that transcended legal systems because it came before legal systems existed. Thorvax was rattling in his containment field now. That big armored body of his shifting with what I recognized as fear. This is a human child's tricks, he spat, his translator rendering his clicks and scrapes into galactic standard. Section 47 requires testimony of events witnessed firsthand. She cannot testify to my intent. Yes, I can, Zainab said, and her voice had gone cold. Not loud, not angry, just cold in a way that made my thermal regulators spike. Because you told us, you came to Kepler 44-2 personally, 6 weeks before the poisoning. You met with the colony leadership, including my mother, who was the agricultural coordinator, and you said, and I quote, "The great thing about mixed colonies is that no one can agree on what counts as murder." You laughed when you said it. I was 12 years old, sitting in the back of that meeting room doing my homework, and you looked right at me and laughed. The courtroom. Exploded is too simple a word. It was more like watching a carefully stacked tower of cards get hit by a shockwave. Delegates from every species started shouting, signaling, transmitting protests and confirmations and legal objections all at once. The Vrax were demanding temporal verification. The Peluvians wanted quantum certainty analyses. The Yithrans started calculating probability matrices of false memory versus true recall across species barriers. But radiance through suffering raised one glowing appendage and the room fell silent again. When Illuminoth tells you to shut up, you shut up. They're pacifists by nature, but they can also generate enough light to permanently blind half the species in the council if they get angry enough. The accused has been identified by the witness in personal testimony, the judge said slowly. Thorvax Kanash, do you deny being present at Kepler 42 colony 6 weeks prior to the contamination event? Thorvax's mandibles worked soundlessly for a moment. Then, I was there on routine inspection. Standard corporate oversight. But You were there, Zainab said. Your ship's logs will confirm it. Your corporate expense reports will confirm it. The colony's security recordings will confirm it. But more than that, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. I recorded the meeting. I swear, the temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees. At least, it felt like it did. And my species doesn't even experience temperature the way most of you do. You see, Zainab continued, her voice steady, terrifyingly steady. Humans have this thing about truth. We're obsessed with it. We lie constantly. We're actually really good at lying, but we're also obsessed with catching lies. So we record things, everything. Our phones, our glasses, our security systems, our children's toys. We record conversations at dinner tables and business meetings and first dates and… She held up the device and boring corporate oversight visits to colony worlds, where some little girl is doing her homework in the back of the room because her mom had to bring her to work that day. She pressed something on the device. A holographic projection bloomed into the air, and suddenly we were all watching a recording from 6 years ago. The image quality was poor by galactic standards, human technology still being relatively primitive, but it was clear enough. A meeting room. Several humans sitting around a table, including a woman who looked remarkably like an older version of Zainab, and Thorvax, massive and armored, his 6 eyes gleaming as he gestured with his forward manipulators. Don't understand why you're concerned, his voice came through, tinny but unmistakable. The waste processing is entirely within Krell's standard protocols. But we've seen the chemical analyses, the woman, Zainab's mother, said in the recording. Those protocols might work for Krell biology, but we have Rax colonists here. Peluvian researchers. The heavy metals alone will dissipate naturally. I've supervised 100 operations like this. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful. We have children here, Thorvax. My daughter's school is 2 kilometers from the main water treatment plant. And then, clear as anything, Thorvax's clicking laughter. The great thing about mixed colonies is that no one can agree on what counts as murder. If something goes wrong, and it won't, but if it does, you'll spend decades arguing about which species' definition of harm applies while I'm already mining the next world. He looked directly at the camera then, those 6 eyes finding the child in the back of the room. Don't worry, little human. Your species is good at surviving. It's practically all you do. The hologram froze. Zainab touched the device again and it disappeared. Thorvax had gone completely still in his containment field. Every species in that courtroom was staring at him with whatever their equivalent of horror was, because he just admitted it. Not the act itself that had been proven 1,000 times over, but the intent, the malice, the calculated dismissal of mixed species legal protection as a tool for avoiding accountability. 6 weeks later, Zainab said softly, the contamination started. It took 4 days for anyone to realize what was happening. By then, the entire water supply was poisoned. My mother lasted 2 weeks longer than most humans, because she'd been taking supplements for a nutritional deficiency that happened to partially counteract the specific toxins. She spent those 2 weeks helping organize evacuations, getting the Peluvian researchers to their ships, moving the Rax colonists to the northern settlements where the contamination hadn't spread yet. Her voice cracked, just slightly. She died saving a Krell mining supervisor, one of your people, Thorvax. She pulled him from a collapsed building and got him to a med pod before the toxins in her bloodstream finally stopped her heart. I watched Thorvax's eyes, all 6 of them, and I saw something I'd never seen in a Krell before. Shame, maybe. Or maybe just the realization that he'd finally been caught in a way he couldn't argue or buy or threaten his way out of. 4.2 billion deaths across 3 worlds, Zainab continued. Humans, Vrax, Peluvians, Yithran, and yes, even 17 Krell who were on those worlds for legitimate reasons and got caught in the contamination your illegal waste dumping caused. You killed your own people, Thorvax. You killed everyone. Because it was cheaper than proper disposal, and because you thought no one could ever agree on how to prosecute you for it. Radiance through suffering's glow had taken on a harsh, sharp quality. The testimony is entered into the record. All procedural objections are hereby waived under Section 47 provisions. Does any delegation wish to challenge the validity of this evidence? Silence. The Vrax, who'd spent 17 months arguing about temporal causality, said nothing. The Peluvians, who'd been insisting crime was relative to reference frames, sat motionless. Even the Yithran, with their probability matrices and quantum uncertainty, simply accepted it. Because sometimes, truth is just truth. No matter how you measure time, no matter what your biochemistry is, no matter how your species perceives reality, murder is murder when you admit you did it knowing it would kill people, and not caring, because you thought you'd get away with it. The council will adjourn for deliberation, Radiance Through Suffering announced. Given the admission of Section 47 testimony with direct recorded evidence of intent, I anticipate our deliberation will be brief. They weren't kidding. 3 hours. After 17 months of circular arguments and procedural deadlocks, it took 3 hours for 43 species to unanimously agree that Thorvax Kanash was guilty of premeditated genocide across species lines. The sentence came down the next day. Life imprisonment in a multi-species detention facility with absolutely zero chance of parole, commutation, or appeal. But here's the thing that really gets me. The thing I think about late in my rest cycles when I'm processing the day's events. It wasn't the evidence that broke the deadlock. We'd had evidence. Mountains of it. Data crystals creating their own gravitational fields worth of evidence. What broke the deadlock was that one human girl standing up and saying I was there. I saw it. I recorded it. And I'm not letting you pretend it didn't happen. See, the rest of us, all 43 species with our advanced civilizations and our complex legal frameworks, we'd gotten so caught up in process that we'd forgotten the point of it all. We were arguing about temporal causality and biochemical determinism and quantum observer effects, while a mass murderer sat there counting down to his freedom. We'd made justice so complicated that it had become impossible. Then, this tiny human, barely into adulthood by her species' standards, who'd lost her mother and her home and 4 billion of her neighbors, just cut through all of it. She didn't argue legal theory. She didn't present competing frameworks. She just told the truth, backed it up with evidence, and forced us all to remember that law exists to protect people, not to protect itself. I saw Zainab after the verdict was announced. She was standing with the human delegation, Ambassador Okonkwo hugging her, while Dr. Tanaka wiped tears from her eyes. That crying thing humans do when they're happy and sad at the same time, which still confuses me. Rajesh Kapoor was shaking his head in what I'd learned was human amazement. Diego Vasquez was laughing. Fatim al-Rashid was speaking rapidly into a communication device, probably reporting back to Earth. I approached carefully because, well, humans are unpredictable, and this one had just done something unprecedented in galactic history. Zainab Okafor, I said, doing my best to pronounce the name correctly. I am Observer Kelthus of the Archival Corps. I document significant legal proceedings for historical record. May I ask, how did you know? How did you know about Section 47? She looked at me with those dark human eyes, and she smiled. A small, tired smile that seemed to carry more weight than her small frame should be able to hold. My mother was a lawyer before she became an agricultural coordinator, she said. When I was little, she used to read me galactic law codes as bedtime stories instead of fairy tales. Said it was important to know the rules, especially the old ones that everyone forgot about, because she paused, her voice catching. Because the powerful always count on you not knowing your rights. Of course it was something like that. Humans and their obsession with teaching their children things. Reading law codes as bedtime stories. Who does that? Apparently, the kind of people who raise daughters brave enough to stand alone in a courtroom full of aliens and demand justice for 4 billion dead. Your mother would be proud, I said, because it seemed like the thing to say. Zainab nodded. Tears streaming down her face now, that crying thing again. I know, she whispered. I hope she knows. Wherever she is, I hope she knows. The human delegation left shortly after, returning to their quarters in the diplomatic sector. But the impact of what had happened, that rippled out for months, years. Suddenly, every long-running trial in the galactic legal system got a second look. Dozens of cases that had been stuck in procedural hell for decades got resolved in weeks. Species started reviewing their legal frameworks, looking for the parts that had gotten too complicated, too self-referential, too focused on process over justice. And everywhere in law schools and courtrooms across 1,000 worlds, they started teaching about the human girl who invoked Section 47, about the species so young they were barely considered civilized by galactic standards, who somehow remembered parts of the law that species millions of years older had forgotten, about the importance of recording truth, of preserving evidence, of standing up even when you're small and scared and everyone expects you to sit down and be quiet. You want to know why humans scare me? Not because they're aggressive, though they are. Not because they're emotional, though they definitely are. Not even because they record everything, though that's deeply unsettling for those of us who value privacy. Humans scare me because they refuse to forget. They record their history, their laws, their conversations, their mother's last words, everything. And then they use it. They weaponize memory in ways the rest of us can't even imagine. We think 3,000 years is a long time. Humans still talk about events from 5,000 years ago like they happened yesterday. They carry their dead with them, not as burden but as foundation, and they will absolutely invoke ancient laws written before their species could read if it means getting justice for someone they loved. Thorvax learned that the hard way. He thought he could outlast the legal system. He thought humans were too new, too young, too irrelevant to matter. He was wrong. And now he's spending the rest of his very long Krell lifespan in a cell, thinking about the tiny human girl who brought him down with a recording device, a forgotten law, and the kind of courage that comes from watching your mother die saving strangers and deciding that has to mean something.
Yeah, humans.
They're absolutely terrifying once you really understand what they're capable of. And the truly scary part? Zainab Okafor wasn't special. She was just human, which means there are billions more like her out there, carrying their dead, recording their truths, and absolutely refusing to let the universe forget what happened. Sleep well, fellow species. The humans are here now, and they remember everything.